Thank you all for being here today. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Goodman, in your written statement, you state the White Coat Waste Project identified at least $10 million in NIH grants for transgender animal experiments. You state that 95% of the funding came from Dr. Fauci's NIAID. Why is the federal government spending taxpayer dollars to create transgender animals?
It's a great question.
Your microphone.
Thank you. It's a great question. I mean, I wonder why they're making cats constipated also. It's a question that rings around in my head at night when I'm going to bed, why we're funding these things. A lot of the programs that are funded do latch on to some type of social trend, and then animal experimenters use it as a money grab, as an excuse to get NIH tax funds from some, you know, in this case, DEI grants were used to fund a lot of this stuff. So people who abuse animals find some kind of excuse to bring in new money, and they'll switch their research program over to something that's trendy to bring tax dollars into their university. I mean, that's part of the big problem here, is that colleges and universities are taking 25 to 40% off the top of every single one of these grants for indirect costs that go into a slush fund that has nothing to do with the research. So they're willing to let experimenters do whatever they want to animals to keep the money flowing in.
Some people might describe that as money laundering. All right, are sex change experiments that forcibly transition mice, rats, and monkeys necessary for science?
Absolutely not.
Why do these experiments at all, if they aren't producing useful human relevant research, why again, you think it's a money issue, follow the money?
Animal testing is big business.
As you know, I've been long vocal about animal experiments and federal funded animal testing, and worked with you to prevent Fauci's plan to waste almost $2 million in taxpayer dollars to maim and murder beagle puppies, for example. Why was Dr. Fauci so insistent on poisoning these puppies, even though, as you state in your written statement, the FDA does not mandate that human drugs be studied on dogs?
So much of the problem with all of this is institutional inertia. It's that people just continue doing the same thing because that's what they've done before. There was a report that came out, the National Academy of Sciences put out a few years ago about the VA's testing on dogs that Congressman Khanna actually helped us get the NAS to conduct. And they found that most of the VA's testing on dogs was unnecessary. And not only that it was unnecessary, but one of the reasons why is that there's this circular reasoning that they use to defend it when they propose a new project. They say, well, we use dogs previously, so we're just going to use dogs again. And there's no one to break that cycle. There's not enough oversight to say, hey, maybe we don't need to do this anymore. Maybe there's a better way to do it. It's like, you know, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that's kind of the problem.
Right. And what would have happened to these beagle puppies if if your organization hadn't rescued them?
In the case of those experiments, those dogs were going to be force-fed and injected with massive doses of experimental drugs to poison them to see at what point they got sick or died. And those tests will have no relevance for the safety and efficacy of that drug in human beings.
Thank you. Dr. Locke, I have a few questions for you. Can the scientific challenges we face today be solved by relying on animal testing?
No, not all of them.
Can you briefly describe how new technologies can allow us to transition away from animal testing without hindering scientific research?
Certainly. I also want to point out that in my written testimony, I do try to lay out a roadmap for how that could happen. But basically what we need to do is we need to spend a lot more resources supporting these non-animal technologies, such as organs on a chip and organoids, so we can use those to study many of the phenomena that we're now studying in animals.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Baker, what are your thoughts today, you know, reading your testimony, for the opportunity to testify that it's long overdue? Where do we go from here? How do we fix the problem?
I think we fix the problem by investing in what is going right. We've got to cut a lot of this terrible animal research. We need to cut the National Primate Research Centers. We are funding these centers to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars every year. We've got to stop funding animal experiments outside the United States, as Mr. Goodman said, that have no oversight. We've got to stop. If you can meet your objectives without using animals, there's absolutely no reason that you should. And so,
And I was going to say, thank you for bringing that up, the amount of money, the hundreds of millions. I recently found out in the state of South Carolina, in my district, there's a primate breeding center and testing site, Alpha Genesis. They've made, to my understanding, over $100 million from NIH over the last 20 or so years. This is a boondoggle. It is a racket and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, in fact, have been wasted on it. So I want to thank you all for your testimony today. Thank you for being here. I would now like to recognize my colleague, Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.